All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's very happy to be here in person. It's always nice to be in Austin, Texas, and definitely nice to be in Austin, Texas right now. I am Travis Blake. Many of you may have remembered me from years past. I am back in the space community now, Chief Commercial Officer of Privateer, and extremely excited to be along Privateer with their mission. And with that, I think we'll show a video.
Together, we'll go far. One another. Solve problems together. It's a race. It isn't a competition. We are not one person, one company, one nation. One planet. Explorers. We are dreamers, risk takers, interviewers. We are human. And it's up to us to work together to do what is right and what is good. So, taking care of what we have to the next generation.
So what's funny here is that the last time I did one of these, I did not have to have the glasses. So that tells you how long ago this was. So as you saw with that video, it's very aspirational what Privateer is trying to do. What attracted me to it is that we actually don't really have an idea of competition. We are in this with partners. We're in this with collaborators. It starts with the knowledge graph technology that we were fortunate to be able to license from Mariba here at the University of Texas, in the way that we can expand that out to power the entire space economy. Come talk to me. We're looking for developers. We're looking for partners to be able to use that. All sorts of partners are invited. I had a long conversation with our developer last night about a development environment. To basically allow people to come in and see what they can add to space, to the security of space, the sustainability of space, and I'm very practical at heart, to the revenue of space. We've always had problems in this community generating consistent revenue that's outside the telecommunications market. I think you can see that we are at that precipice to be able to make that happen, and it takes a community. This is not a marketplace that can be satisfied by a single entity. We believe that collaboration amongst a lot of people is what's going to make this work. So come talk to us. I think we have sources of data. We have services that you can utilize in order to make things better. We have just come out of kind of stealth mode with our Wayfinder app. It is at privateer.com. It might look very familiar if you're used to looking at astrograph. But that's really just the beginning for us. Pay attention. We have already talked about the next things that are going to roll out, and we'd love to have people in this audience here and those around the world come collaborate with us to figure out what the next things are that come out. I'm extremely excited not only to be here with one of the Privateer co-founders and our chief scientist, Mariba, but also with Kevin, one of our distinguished advisors. I don't know that I really need to introduce Kevin. If I took a poll, there's probably nobody in this room who has not known Kevin for a while. He is like I said, an advisor to Privateer, recognized space commerce expert. I was told to read off this sheet, but I'm pretty sure it's wrong. It says he has almost 4 decades of space commercialization technology. I'm pretty sure that's 5. What's the nice thing is though about Kevin is we seem to focus on his most recent experience within commerce, but you know he also has a deep background in the Defense Department, State Department, Vice President's office, and the Director of Central Intelligence. So a very well-rounded viewpoint when it comes to working with the government. So with that, Kevin O'Connell.
At least you didn't say 6 decades. Sometimes it feels like that. Good morning, everyone. And Thank you very much for that kind introduction. First of all, let me thank the International Academy of Astronautics and the Strauss Center for the invitation to be a keynote here this morning. Marie is also very convincing, as I think everybody in the room knows. Let me also thank the corporate sponsors, Privateer, Kahan Space, North Star, and many, many others. Our conversations here are exceptionally timely in light of the situation here on Earth, but also in space. I would be remiss to begin without calling our attention to the situation in Ukraine. Extreme Russian hostility toward their neighbors in Ukraine is an international outrage and a source of historic human tragedy. Our thoughts are immediately with those who are affected by this terrible and unnecessary crisis. Of course, this is a country that justified a destructive ASAT test in November on the grounds that they were intentionally creating debris in their own national security interest. UN's orbital debris guidelines from 2007 indicate that any intentional debris must be limited to a small amount and short-lived. Seems like Russia failed on both counts. Back to the worsening crisis, it seems that China, long the footstopper on sovereignty issues, also seems to have lost its voice on this one. Alas, another country with whom we ultimately need to find some cooperative path in space. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. This community can take pride at the positive developments that commercial space activities continue to offer during the crisis, whether bolstering communications for the Ukrainian government, whether for providing additional assistance to humanitarian providers, providing satellite imagery, insights about the conduct of the war. This is exactly what we wrote about 22 years ago. We wrote our book, Commercial Observation Satellites, and allowing for the precise and timely delivery of aid through space-based navigation systems. This is not unlike the outsized contributions that space made and continues to make in response to the COVID global pandemic. These crises are just another example of why space is so important in our lives. While we have made good progress in this area, there's still too many people who do not understand why space is so important, and in particular, why human exploration in space is so important. And so our work continues. Let me lighten the burden for a few minutes and probably talk about something you're much more accustomed to me talking about. What we have in front of us is nothing less than the massive opportunity of the space economy. From my vantage point, as I testified before Congress last year, the space economy is accelerating and diversifying. We see new entrants in space segments traditionally considered commercialized, like communications and remote sensing, and we also see new entrants in a wide range of areas that will drive space exploration and space commerce. Let me highlight a few quick points on this. I'm just back from a private investor conference in Los Angeles where 20 new emerging companies were highlighted, with examples of composite work, radiation hardening, artificial intelligence applications, human support systems, and cleaner propulsion technologies were showcased. This is just one example of many such events we see around the United States routinely, and frankly, as we're starting to see elsewhere around the world. Very exciting. The increased accessibility of space means that entrepreneurs can now bring capabilities to market faster, and we're now seeing a whole new wave of experimentation by companies that have never had any involvement in space before. Governments around the world are recognizing the growing importance of space, not only for vital public missions, but also for economic growth, talent development, and innovation. This includes a number of US states and jurisdictions traditionally not involved in space activities. Finally, there's increasing recognition that the talent required to support the space economy is broad and diverse, generating new opportunities from every segment of the population and every discipline. The projected $1 to $3 trillion space economy expected over the next 2 decades has great implications for education, training, human resources, and others. Most importantly, there's increasing depth, breadth, and financial backing across even the newest market segments, like space medicine, on-orbit manufacturing, and quantum encryption and cybersecurity for use in space systems. Please don't mistake my enthusiasm as a view that everyone will succeed. They will not. But the market is broad enough, this is a key point, the market is broad enough and deep enough in many space market segments to allow for normal consolidation for those who fail. To say it another way, There are often numerous participants in each of these newer market segments pursuing different technical approaches. So how well are we doing in managing the environmental impact of all these activities? We finally hear a growing number of voices about the problem or problems, but how are we actually doing? The Director of National Intelligence's Global Trends 2040 report published last year highlighted the increasing advance of technological developments simultaneously transforming and improving human experience and capabilities while creating new tensions and disruptions in and between societies, industries, and states. Just last month, the World Economic Forum identified 3 areas in its global risk reports that demand cosmic action, including space congestion and competition, and planet Earth itself. Cybersecurity, a field of great importance and relevance to space, was also highlighted. So it sounds like space activities are playing right along with those projections. The growing complexity of space security, growing expectations of space as a unique vantage point from which to observe human and natural phenomena on Earth, and how to keep space safe and sustainable for future use fall right along these lines. So let's stay right on this topic of space safety and sustainability. I believe that we really are at a pivotal time in dealing with the space safety issue, and I probably imagine that no one in this room or even online would disagree with that. Space safety appears to be the most urgent need, but it need not be an end in and of itself. Improving space safety will serve as the necessary foundation for all of the exciting things I talked about a moment ago. The top priority, of course, is to deepen our understanding of where things are in space. While that's an essential task, it represents only the start of a number of new space safety services that will enable the growth of the space economy. Our understanding can no longer be constrained to the 20-odd thousand larger objects currently contained in the DoD catalog, or the projected 30-odd thousand items larger than a softball. We need to understand where hundreds of millions of pieces are dynamically in order to avoid collisions. The ultimate problem that everyone in this group worries about is the so-called Kessler syndrome, which results from a cataclysmic chain reaction in space that renders orbits or other parts of space useless. I worry as much about the declining costs of space access that we are now enjoying could be reversed as new spacefarers have to bulk up, add fuel, or maneuver many, many more times. Space safety is fundamental to all activities in space, even strategic military activities. What DoD and other military organizations describe as space domain awareness is above and beyond space situational awareness. Given the importance of these tasks, our relative attention to space safety and sustainability is truly paradoxical. Let me frame it another way. Government investment in space activities in 2021 reached a high level of $90 billion, according to Euroconsult, with an additional $46 billion of private equity investment. Over $250 billion of private equity investment has been made into over 1,700 unique space companies over the past decade. And by the way, an important contributor on this, as the innovations in the space finance community continue to change, they are now attuned that this is a real problem. Okay, that's one of the developments I've seen over the last few years. That the finance community is paying attention and asking people, what is your strategy for orbital debris mitigation amidst the 100 other questions that they ask companies that they invest in? Yet the problems of space debris and congestion continue to grow. There's no parallel level of investment that comes anywhere near the social and economic value of space or the risk associated with collisions in space. A look at the excellent but relatively small size of academic research in this area, we're at a world-class hub right here, is another example. A recent statistic cited at the AIAASN conference details the unique difficulty of the problem. Only 3% of conjunctions today involve active or inactive satellites. Another 30% involve one active satellite and debris, whether a paint chip or a rocket body or whatever. The final 67% involve conjunctions between two pieces of debris. So there's really very little options for dealing with that. Decision-making related to space safety has also become hard, as the number of conjunction warnings that space operators have to deal with has exploded in volume as debris fields grow. Cognitive psychology tells us that people who confront continuous multiple warnings often do nothing. In my mind, this creates great urgency for us to help motivate those who don't understand this complex problem and to bring creative solutions to bear on it. That's what we're all here to do. Let's dispense with some of the usual noise that accompanies this opportunity, at least here in the United States. The problem is very hard and requires a whole of government approach to creative solutions. Government and private roles are both important, and rather than look at them as competing, their roles are both different and necessary. Okay. In my early years in space commerce, we had a large debate for about a decade about whether commercial imaging systems competed with or were complementary to government systems, and that probably set the entire industry back a decade or more than that. A government role here is essential because of outer space treaty obligations, governance, taxpayer accountability, research investments, and other reasons. There are compelling reasons to shift the conjunction warning mission to the civil and commercial arena, from leveraging advanced IT to increase transparency to encouraging the growth of an entire new space market segment and international cooperation. Private companies are rapidly developing new capabilities and can also adapt in the face of a rapidly changing space environment. Space Policy Directive 3, since continued by the Biden administration, recognized the importance of leveraging the private sector as a key element of the overall U.S. response. I spoke about this often during my time in commerce, but I've observed it firsthand in my own work with a number of these companies since leaving the government early last year. Firms are working at many different places along what I'll call the value chain of information related to space safety. Rather than simply collecting data, they're developing information services that can be used by space operators and government overseers. An already diverse slate of ground-based sensors is about to be supplemented by space-based SSA capabilities. Every company I am aware of is leveraging cloud-based data management and storage and applying analytic capabilities from a wide range of industry sectors. Mariba has talked for years about the modeling problem associated with space objects. You had a good article on this last night, if I recall. And that can be done now using state-of-the-art computational methods and modeling tools. New visualization and warning mechanisms are already in the market and coming to market now. Other companies, as this audience knows, are working to bring debris removal capabilities into the market, consistent with a push for lower costs and a broader emphasis on satellite servicing and manufacturing. On-orbit refueling, repair, and manufacturing will again improve the economics of space. Private sector activities have a way of keeping up with the problem at speed in a way that governments do not, because of budget and acquisition cycles, near-term focus, and other issues. There's sometimes a view that space operators don't give a damn, quote unquote, about space sustainability. That's simply a ridiculous statement when you think about it for a minute or two. We've seen the private sector take a much more active interest in the topic, either through participation in space organizations like CONFERS, participation in the international standards work, like in ISO and others, and especially commitments to purchase commercial SSA information and other space safety services. So what's changing very rapidly right now is the potential character of any public-private partnerships in this area as private sector capabilities leap forward and government approaches remain very conventional. It's my view that US government funding against this problem remains insufficient to the urgency and the importance of the task, and the impressive advance of the commercial sector in this area means that the government should immediately move to leverage these capabilities. A hard-fought bipartisan consensus on the current plan, including the key role of the Department of Commerce, is codified in the Space Acts of 2020 and 2021, and now in conference within the United States Innovation and Competition Act of 2021. And I'd highlight there the idea of the creation of the Center or Centers of Excellence for SSA in academia, which I also think are badly needed. Let's talk about regulation for a moment. Along with increased public recognition of the problem, inevitably comes a call to do something. During a recent French TV interview, I was asked, Kevin, why don't we just stop everything until we figure this out? Okay. And I don't need to tell this audience that's not going to happen. Okay. Political pressure or a space crisis could invoke regulatory ideas that are uninformed and therefore potentially damaging to both government and industry missions. The aversion here is to uninformed regulation or regulation unsupported by rigorously collected experience and data. More immediate solutions can involve everything from targeted government investments to the use of operator incentives to new opportunities, for example, in the space insurance industry. Space insurance industry stands to benefit from openly and commercially available data as it allows them to improve risk models and create new products. International cooperation, such as we see here in this conference, is absolutely essential to making progress against the space debris challenge. During my time at Commerce, we engaged with a number of allies and like-minded partners from the Commonwealth, Europe, and Japan, to name a few. We have begun to discuss concrete areas of cooperation, whether in the open architecture or other areas. The Biden administration is emphasizing this international cooperation with a specific view toward developing norms of behavior in space. While diplomatic discussions are important, here too, the private sector will more quickly drive practical, badly needed rules of the road for space. Especially where I started this discussion on the challenges of dealing with Moscow and Beijing, these rules are best driven from the bottom up rather than by some ideological or legal construct imposed from above. This is especially important given the speed of technical and business models for space. Space traffic management, an oft misunderstood term, now recast often as space traffic coordination management, is initially about improving the ability of space operators to coordinate directly, but should develop over time as a recognized set of global rules and behaviors. I didn't get to the climate change part of our mandate, but there are equally interesting opportunities to leverage private sector activities in this area as well. And there's an interesting but still small community of people writing about the Earth-space ecosystem and how the two interact that really requires further exploration. Let me leave time for a couple of questions, if I might. If you have one takeaway here, it's the need to move quickly, and that doesn't mean recklessly, to improve space safety and sustainability. In the first instance, it's increasing our awareness of where things are in space with the purpose of improving safety, but this will also give way to a much larger slate of activities, both in space and on the ground, that support space sustainability. The consequence of failure could ultimately affect many of our lives in a negative way here on Earth. There could be potentially consequences for everything from scientific knowledge and exploration to economic competitiveness and our daily activities here on Earth. And that would be truly ironic, given that these are the exact reasons we went to space to begin with, and why we continue to pursue new and exciting activities in space today. These are just a few thoughts to seed our discussions today, and I'll look forward to those conversations. So on that note, I'll stop. Thanks very much.
All right. Anybody have any questions? Really?
I wonder if you could give us a couple of details. You just said that there could be consequences, and I assume this could be both bad and good, although I think you were implying bad. In terms of daily life on Earth, how do you think that lack of space sustainability might play out badly?
Yeah, I think many of the services that we come to take for granted today could either be harmed or damaged or not accessible in ways that we're accustomed to today. While we were at Commerce, NIST did a study on the economic value of the GPS constellation since inception. And very few people, when they do one of 100 things a day, say, gee, I'm thankful that I'm using the GPS satellites right at this moment. That's one example. We're learning so much more from space. I've spent a lot of my time looking at the satellite imagery world and see the consequences of that today in the conflict. But we see so many more insights that are being developed as we take satellite imagery data of multiple phenomena and apply it to different, I'll call it market verticals, to stay in the language. So I think we have to worry that some of these capabilities could actually be harmed or just ruined entirely if we're not very careful.
Hey, Kevin.
Hi.
So I think the current activity that's going on right now is the space safety activity within the U.S. government Department of Commerce. But getting back to the regulatory aspect, I think it's an open question. I'd like your, now that you're no longer in government, where is that, whatever that may be as far as regulation goes, where is that best sourced from? Is that FCC? Is that Office of Space Commerce? Or what in your opinion is the best mechanism or place to do that? Thank you.
So Mark, you know that one of the things we worked on and is continuing to be worked on is the whole question of mission authorization. Because there are legal authorities, explicit legal authorities for three functions: launch, communications, and remote sensing, and everything else is covered generally. As so many new kinds of capabilities come into the market, you know, finding a path to govern those. We wanted those seated in the Department of Commerce. There's an AIAA paper out right now. It's just come out that I was a co-author on. That's very much part of that. We see a lot of value in putting that specifically to commerce. On the broader issue of regulation, though, my point really was there'll be a temptation if something bad happens. There'll be a temptation to just do something or do anything. And I worry a lot because moves like that could really potentially damage not only industry, but the government missions that they are supporting. So we have to be very careful when we take measures, and even while in commerce, people would argue, hey, why don't we stop doing this? Why don't we stop doing that, et cetera? Those are uninformed by data or experience as to what their real consequences would be.
My question is basically, at what point will the deorbiting and burning up of space debris in the stratosphere become unsustainable as a mitigation option for space debris mitigation? In other words, the burning up, I think you understand the question. At what point will it become unsustainable?
Yeah, Kevin.
I mean, there are far more qualified people in this audience who can speak to that specifically from a technical perspective. Mariba. Sooner than you think is probably the answer.
Oh, that's good. I mean, I did see that Aerospace Corporation is looking into it because it really has never been studied what actually happens to these materials when they are sublimated in the stratosphere.
Well, it's a small fraction of the natural debris that makes down the atmosphere today. So we have to look at this specific molecular species and all that kind of stuff.
No, that's true.
The
But
number of tons per day of stuff coming in.
yeah, no, that's true. But my response to that is there was probably an oil and gas conference in 1960 that said the materials that we're putting out into the atmosphere is not been affected because it's so large. But we can't do anything about the natural debris, but we can do something about the space debris. And my thought is that what goes to space should stay in space. By deorbiting and burning it, you're eliminating any value. If you keep it in space and create resource orbits or places for it to go, that value increases. You're monetizing space debris.
I think that's an interesting idea. We just haven't done that for the first 60 years, and that's what's given us the problem we have today. How we have to do that in the context of the realities we're facing in space today. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, going back to mission authorization, what would you say to those who want a one-stop shop?
I love the one-stop shop idea. So when I got to Commerce in mid-2018, it was an idea that I won't say it was in vogue because it was actually headed out at that point. I felt that it was an interesting idea for a variety of reasons, not least of which was one didn't have to go around town when they came to Washington and find their way to different agencies and different cultures and things like that. What the one-stop shop was never about was that Commerce would be the only place. What the idea of a one-stop shop was, it was essentially an interagency-like effort that would be placed in one location. Someone once, in a familiar parallel from my own life, someone once compared it to the National Counterterrorism Center from an organizational perspective, not for purpose, obviously, but actually having a place where people could come and gather together and really approve 80–90% of everything that came through the doorway, but also people that knew when they had to call home because it was not consistent with some important rules that they had to consider. I'm still a fan of the idea. It's hard to do bureaucratically. You know, Washington's a tough place when you have to make big bureaucratic change like that.
Thanks, everyone, for
presentation. Yeah, so how do you see the role of commercial? The role of commercial industry and when it comes to international cooperation. Obviously, especially talking about Russia or China, right? The governments, the way they are organized, right? The communication doesn't happen as fast as the right? So between different operators from
Yeah, I think commercial will play a huge role in international cooperation. When I was at the CSF FAA conference a couple of weeks ago, I was highlighting the European Union space traffic management announcements that had just come out the previous day. And one of the highlights from my perspective is that they were telling space operators to leverage capabilities that were at least as good at, if not better, than what was available from the government. I use the phrase commercial. They didn't use that specific phrase, but obviously I think that's an encouragement for the use of commercial services. Will there be competition? Sure there will be, but I think we're still, and Travis, you hit on this a little bit. I think this is much more an issue of lots of market demand and lots of collaboration before we get to a ferocious competition. So I think there's a big room for that, CMI.
All right, I'm going to do one question from online, and then we're going to let you off the hook, Kevin, because you've been really awesome answering these questions. So this one comes from Catherine Courtney. And I'm going to try to read your handwriting, unless you want to read it since you wrote it. While you do it. There's a word in there that I was going to, looks like a bad word to me. I don't want to.
I'm an old teacher. That's my bad writing. All right, it says, Kevin mentioned the benefits to insurers for better SSA data, but I perceive a passing off of risk between insurers and regulators today, at least in the UK. Insurers assume a license means risk has been understood by the regulators, and regulators assume risk can be underwritten by insurance. Neither have the tools they need to accurately assess and monitor risk. How do we break that circular logic?
So I don't agree. I don't disagree at all with the question and what's implied in the question. In our discussions in the space insurance industry, I think they're the first ones to tell you that they're looking for new tools to be able to assess risk. Some of that's based on behavior and the collection of data. If you follow the space insurance industry in any detail over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, one of their concerns is they don't have sufficient data to populate their risk models. Set aside the Russian ASAT test, which is a very, very hard thing to do. The commercially available SSA data will start to inform those risk models on everything from risk in different constellations and different orbits, et cetera. I don't know if the regulators off the hook as well, but again, I'd rather leverage insurance as part of a regulatory regime, a privately driven set of ideas, and then I would simply leave it all in the hands of the regulators. The regulators also need better data, quite frankly. Again, Diane and I worked on something together for the better part of a year, looking for high quality data to do certain kinds of risk assessments. And it was very hard to come by, even for a government that had done 6 decades worth of space activities. So,
thank you, Kevin.
all right, thank you very much.